If your goal is to be one of the fastest, most explosive, best in shape, strongest, most powerful versions of yourself next season, you better be doing a GPP program. What's up, I'm Coach Nick. I'm a certified strength and conditioning coach, and I work with hundreds of rugby, MMA, and every single sport that you can actually think of. So you're probably wondering, what is GPP? It stands for General Physical Preparedness. And this is an area that a lot of athletes, as they start to get more developed, typically skip, or even with social media and seeing 100 different reels a day and do this workout for this explosive thing, right? Like, there's too many times that everyone that is trying to train to get better, to be playing at the next level, skips these movements and skips these phases of training, which severely limit their overall potential that they can actually hit. So GPP stands for General Physical Preparedness, like I said, and that's exactly what we're doing. So we're not necessarily trying to be sport specific or target the exact qualities that we're going to be using in our sport. Instead, what we're doing is we're thinking about building a massive base to an overall, like, think of a pyramid, right? We can only build the peak as high as we can, depending on that base. So what we're working on in a GPP program is strength. There's a little hypertrophy, but it's largely over trying to increase your overall work capacity and conditioning so that you can handle harder and more intense training as the year progresses and still see results of those, rather than getting burnt out or then you get into overtraining because your base is so small. So I'm gonna be sharing with you our GPP program that's gonna run anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks that we're gonna be using in our rugby specific program, but you can tailor this and use this. Again, it's GPP, so it's for everyone and every athlete to make it work for yourself. Okay, so I have the first couple days up, and then we're gonna go into the next few days. And I gotta tell you, if you can complete this one's a little bit more advanced, if you can go through this, you are gonna be in such good shape. You're gonna be so fucking strong, and you're gonna be ready to crush it as we move into our next phases of training. I'm gonna cover the overarching split, and then we'll get into some of the specifics with the days. Now, this being said, some of these working out days that I'll show you, you can move these around. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be right here. I've just placed them in this order to try to get the most optimal and best kind of overarching strategy for ourselves, okay? So we're gonna start off, so we have a full body day, then we go into our conditioning day, and I'll elaborate on this specific density sessions, a lower body day, and then we come over here and we have a conditioning day, again, that's a little bit more grunt worky, aerobic capacity, kind of like get you ready to go, right, and finish with some core. And then we have another upper body day and a field-based day to keep your speed high as we're going through this. We don't want to just lose speed as we go through this, okay? So our first day, full body day, start off with some plyos, okay? Plyos may be considered specific, but I always think you should have some sort of plyos and keep the power and elastic qualities that you have in your body throughout the entire season. I don't think you have to wait until a power phase of training in order to make that happen. So all EX stands for is extensive, STB stands for stability, and then INT stands for intensive. Okay, so extensive, think of like little hop, skips, rhythmic movements that you're trying to develop some elastic qualities. Stability, think of like your landings and progressing and really focus on like hip, knee, ankle stability. And then intensive, that's like your big power-based movements like a broad jump or a box jump with this, okay? So we start off the day with a couple of plyos. With the extensive plyos, we typically keep those a little bit higher volume in the beginning. Again, so order like progressing this up. We're gonna start very simple. This is the first phase of training, and we're getting back to basics, rebuilding from the ground up. So we're really starting with very simple movements and then progressing and progressing and progressing as the year goes on. So for example, this extensive plyo that we may be doing may be simple line hops, and we're gonna start with bilateral movements. So bilateral forward and back or bilateral side to side. And then in a week or two, we might change that into unilateral movements, okay? So just know that as we're going through this. With stability focus, we're gonna be focusing on depth landings, maybe jump off 2, land on 1, maybe some skater landings to really help develop that stability in the hip, okay? Then it's pretty simple with our strength work, okay? So HPSP just stands for the 4 primary movement patterns, which are hinge, push, squat, pull. Now you can say a carry and a lunge are also primary movement patterns, which we have in here as well. But for today, without making the workout too long, we're gonna hit those primary ones. And you can swap what you want in for these. Just make sure that it kind of aligns over here with some of the exercises that you're doing. So with this is gonna be straight high volume work, okay? High volume, getting a lot of reps, working on depth and range of motion, working on good technique. And with the high volume, we're gonna get a little bit of that hypertrophy, you're gonna get a little bit of strength, and you might even get a little bit of like local muscular endurance. So for us, typically we're gonna start around 3 sets, 8 to 10 reps, and we may even progress that up to 15 reps, which is pretty high volume and far away from what we would consider the like power range and explosive range. But again, this is general physical preparedness and we're building a base. So if I can get you to handle 15 reps at 80 to 85% of say a 1 rep max or what that currently is, I know that's pretty high, but if I can get you there, when we get into the other stuff or higher volume based work, you're gonna be so ready to go that like that sort of stuff isn't gonna do anything to you. You're not gonna get tired. Because I've seen athletes come in and jump straight into like a heavy strength or strength and power session. And, we'll be doing like 5x5s at, 83 to 87%, trying to progress them up. And they're absolutely smoked and they cannot recover because that's such a high load and high intensity for them that they're sore for the next 3 to 4 days. But if that's the case for you, and we're trying to move past and still work on other speed things, if you're incredibly sore, how are you gonna handle the work that is required for that next phase of training, right? So this is why we're doing a higher load, higher volume work to get you ready to go, okay? So hip thrust, standing overhead press, we'll get a little bit of core base work in here. These are just like basic movement patterns to get you strong, right? Get you strong, good movement patterns. We have a Zercher squat in here. You can do any other squat like a goblet squat. The Zercher squat is I'm gonna get a little bit of like low back strengthening and I want that, and some core base work, and then pull-ups, right? After pull-ups, we're gonna do just some straight hypertrophy shoulder base work, okay? Lateral raises, front raises, reverse flies, maybe dumbbell upright rows. I'm really just trying to build some body armor. So this is specifically for rugby athletes or contact athletes that have to make tackles or check people, right? Because one of the main issues that tends to happen is that like people just don't have enough muscle on their body, and when they go full force into contact, there's nothing to absorb, right? Like the only thing that absorbs contact is going to be your muscle or fat, right? And if you're a leaner athlete, which a lot of you are probably trying to be, so you can be faster, explosive, jump higher, right? And not have unwanted body weight that's basically making you less conditioned, you're going to want to put on more size in certain areas so that you can handle those high impacts and not get those little nagging injuries that could potentially take you out for a few games. So some shoulder hypertrophy work, and then we're going to move into some isometric work. So isometrics, these are going to be yielding isometrics. Essentially what we're doing is we're trying to prepare the tendons and joints right now to be able to handle higher and higher impact forces as we go into more in-depth power and plyometric based work that typically tax the tendons on there. You also build a lot of stability with this, which is another good thing that we're trying to do. So after we get through with our isos, then we have some just basic core work, okay? So some barbell rollouts, you can load these up, cable crunches, okay? So by no means, and I'm getting ahead of myself, by no means does this mean this is easy, right? So even though it's high volume, even though it's basic, you're the one that's dictating the intensity and you're the one that's dictating the load and how hard you push yourself each and every workout. So if you ever get through a workout and you're like, oh, that was easy, well, that's on you, all right? Okay, you need to push yourself and you need to try to progressively overload it all the time in order to see changes. Okay, but that's a different story. So next, now we're gonna start to cover the conditioning portion. So now we're thinking of building a huge aerobic base and anaerobic base. Okay, so a little behind the scenes of what's going on with the conditioning. There's 3 primary energy systems. So there's your alactic or creatine phosphate, that's like 0 to 10 seconds, 100-meter sprint, max effort, right? Then there's your anaerobic system. So that typically goes up to about 2 minutes, and this is largely where most athletes spend their time, where there's high amounts of energy and effort output, and then there's brief moments of recovery and then doing it again and again and again and again. And then the third one is your aerobic base or beta oxidation. So that's like, think of the marathon runner, or in this example, rugby athletes, like this is as you go longer and longer and longer and longer into your actual game. Now, before we get into this, I'm gonna say one more thing. The time and effort that you put into your movements will dictate which energy systems that you're using, okay? So if you are taking it easy, even though it's a short amount of time, you'll be in the lower or in the beta oxidation. If you are at a very high intensity, then you're gonna be working in one of the top 2 type of movements or top 2 energy systems, okay? So that being said, we're getting into what's called a density session. So we're starting with this. I learned this when I was a strength and conditioning coach at Chaffey College by one of the other coaches. A great way to induce some work capacity, get the athletes to learn what it means to really work hard, okay? And essentially it's a 24-minute AMRAP, so as many rounds or reps as possible that you can get. In this case, we're trying to, there's a little bit of a difference, okay? It's 24 minutes, we're trying to get as many rounds as we can in, but the goal is to get at least 4 and not over 4, okay? So what does that mean? That means the weight and reps and intensities that you're choosing should take you should take 24 minutes to get through 4 rounds. If you're less than that, if say you're only getting 2.5, 3 rounds in, it means you're very deconditioned, okay? And these are gonna be great for you to start to build that conditioning. If you are up at 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds, right? That means you're not pushing yourself hard enough and you need to choose heavier loads or harder exercises with this, okay? So it's one way you can kind of manage it. You always wanna be right around 4 reps or 4 rounds with this, okay? But here's the breakdown of a density session, okay? So it's an explosive movement into a core movement, into a squat, step, or a lunge, a push movement, so upper body push, a hip or hamstring dominant movement, and then a pull movement for your back, okay? And you can swap in any exercise that you want here at different intensities, okay? So for example, a kettlebell swing is going to be a little bit easier to do and get through compared to, say, doing a hang power clean on this, right? Where the load's even higher, okay? And you really gotta get after it, okay? Core work, plank pull-throughs compared to, say, like a med ball throw, where now you're working a little bit of like rotational work. So you can play around with these different movements that you want. So in this case, this would be like a beginner, kind of more entry level. With our athletes, when this goes into the program, the volume is gonna be a lot higher with these movements. So, instead of maybe 5 to 10 swings, we're gonna be doing 20 to 30 swings, because I want it to take around 30 to 45 seconds. In this case, as we're trying to build the work capacity and overall conditioning as we progress on throughout the weeks, the movements will get a little bit harder. We'll have heavier loads, and essentially what we're gonna try to do is take what we would normally do in one session that would take maybe an hour, hour 15, and condense it down into a 24-minute density session. So that's the overall goal. Imagine doing a full workout, all the weights that you normally do, but instead you're trying to smash it on down into 24 minutes to get a high density of training, okay? Hence the name density session, okay? So we have kettlebell swings, plank pull-throughs, some lunges, push-ups, TRX shelf, inverted row, okay? So again, a simple progression is starting body weight, higher volume, and then you can introduce loaded movements or weighted movements and stay typically in maybe the still higher rep range, 12, maybe 15 reps, and then you could work into a typical hypertrophy range, age 12, and then when you're really getting after it, you can start to introduce more strength training numbers where you're in maybe the 4 to 6 range, still lifting heavy loads, but condensing it way down. Excuse me. Okay. So that's our cyclical kind of aerobic based work that we're doing in the gym. And then we're going to get into our anaerobic capacity. Okay. So one thing I forgot to mention with each of those energy systems is that we have a capacity. So think bigger fuel tank, and then something known as repeat power or repeat power ability, right? And this is primarily what all athletes really need. And that's the ability to go very high intensities for a short duration of time, recover quickly, do it again without it significantly dropping off, okay? So that's what we're trying to build here. Some of the things that we're gonna do, again, this isn't specific to any sport unless you're a track athlete, right? Some 400-meter repeats or 110s, or one of my personal favorites is getting on the track and you run a 100, rest 2-3 minutes, then a 200, rest 2-3 minutes, then a 300, rep 2-3 minutes, and you go through that 3 to 4 times. You can even take it up a little bit further if you're more of a, like, if you have to cover more ground, so it's like a soccer athlete or something like that, where you can do 200 meters, 400 meters, 800 meters, and do that 3-4 rounds with that, okay? So that is one of our conditioning sessions that we're getting into, okay? So the load isn't like super high. Again, we're just more conditioning. And then we're gonna get into some of our strength work or our lower body work, okay? So for our lower body day, now we're gonna have 3 different plyometrics. We're gonna have an extensive plyometric. So if this day was maybe extensive plyometrics like pogo hops, right? Up and down. This day, we're gonna have either some lateral side to side or forward to back horizontal type plyometric, extensive plyometrics. Okay, stability. Again, if this was a lateral stability movement, this is probably gonna be more of a depth drop or jump off 2, land on 1 type of stability movement, or where we're specifically really trying to target the ankle with that, like a single leg depth jump, okay? And then one intensive base plyometric, which will typically start off with a like box jump or something that's a little bit more power based, and there doesn't really matter with the ground contact time to keep some of that explosiveness high for them without having the added impact of, you know, some repeat type jumps. For our main lifts, I gotta say, this will be tough. This will be challenging. Doing 2 lower body strength based movements is gonna be tough. Again, the volume will be a little bit higher, like 8-10 reps or so, but I like to induce some tempo based work. So the tempo based work's such a huge foundation for strength that you can basically catapult onto as you move into the next couple of phases. So for us, we're gonna start with some pause or some slow tempo work, and then we'll get into some tempo plus pause. And then we're gonna move into some like hypertrophy-based clusters that we're gonna get into and introduce to them as we get into later phases. So a front squat, great movement. You know, for all athletes, it doesn't matter what athlete, it's just a great movement overall. And then either a deadlift or an RDL. Typically I tend to stay more towards the RDLs or a dumbbell RDL for this, just slow tempo, getting the athlete to move correctly. So after you got squat, hinge, then we're gonna move into some lateral movements, a little bit of mobility-based movements, right? The Cossack toward the groin, a knee-dominant hamstring work. So this could be a Nordic or it could be a machine. It doesn't really matter at this point. We're just trying to target the knee-dominant movement pattern in the hamstring. And then same thing for the quad. So we'll have a more quad-dominant movement. So this could be like a heels elevated Spanish squat, or it can be just a simple knee extension, a little bit higher volume, just trying to put a little bit of size on those, on that muscle group, okay? And then we're gonna train heavy soleus right here for our calves, as the soleus is kind of one of the main contributors of force transfer throughout the body and where a lot of people lack. So we'll train the soleus for the calf. So after our lower body day, so not super hard, right? Then we're gonna go into conditioning. So with this conditioning day, this is probably gonna be a little bit sore. Think of this as somewhat of a active recovery. It's still gonna be hard, but we're trying to get the full body, blood flowing. This is more cyclical in nature, as you'll see here in a second, okay? So this will help to serve as a good recovery base, assuming that you're not going crazy high intensity with it and it actually makes you sore. So a lot of these movements are going to be very concentric only movements, meaning that it's only during the movement primarily targets the contraction of the muscle fiber, and there's not the eccentric action, which is the lengthening under tension, where people typically get a little bit sore. So that's why we have some of the sled-based work. It's really simple, okay? 2 sled circuits, one for the lower body, one for the upper body, okay? So it's a push-pull, very simple, for 10 minutes straight. Put a load on that you think you can do for 10 minutes straight that's gonna challenge you a little bit. You have to control your breathing. You're just pushing it on down, pulling it on back. Typically, I recommend like at least a 20 yards of turf area. With that, you can do, 10 yards. You tend to have to switch kind of a lot. Okay, and then for our upper body, it's a row, a face pull, and a snatch to work a little bit of the back and upper back. And then we move into a carry. So this right here is 20 minutes worth of work. This is another 10, so this is 30 total minutes worth of work. And it's a swing and carry complex. So essentially, you're gonna be cyclical with your movements. You do 10 swings into 10 clean and presses, into 10 snatches, into an overhead walk, all with 2 kettlebells, same weight in your hands going through that. So 10 swings, 10 clean and press, 10 snatch, 10 meters, overhead walk for 10 minutes. Very simple, okay? And then we'll finish off with some core-based work where there's some anti-rotation, rotation, and this is straight leg sit-ups, okay, to hit a little bit of the lower abs and the hip flexors. And then I'll put up the next few days and cover those here in a sec. All right, so our last 2 days are up on the board. We have an upper body day following the conditioning session that we had. Okay, so we're just starting off with one plyometric based movement and one throwing based movement. Okay, so this can be like clap push-ups, drop-in push-ups, if you're a little bit more advanced. Any plyometric movement of a horizontal press or a vertical press if you wanted to, okay? And then we'll get into a throw, okay? So this can be either straight chest passes, floor chest passes, anything where you're simply trying to throw the ball with as much force as possible. These are gonna serve as a little bit of a CNS primer before getting into some of our strength-based work, okay? So for us, very simple, horizontal press plus a horizontal pull. We're gonna superset those together to, again, increase the density of the session, save a little bit of time with that. So we'll be doing a dumbbell neutral press. There'll be some tempo-based work in here as well on the slow eccentric. And then either a neutral row, like a dumbbell neutral row, or cable row, same principles apply, okay? With all of this, it's probably 3 sets. We'll progress up to 4 sets towards the end. Again, higher volume, 8 sets, and then you walk yourself up the volume ladder to get a higher training load. But if you need help with any of that stuff, that's why we have this program available for all of you, and you can check out the links below, okay? Then we have vertical press, vertical pull. So we're gonna use a pullover. For our pull, I think a lot of athletes tend to lack some of the overhead mobility and thoracic extension. So that's why we're gonna start with some pullovers, some dumbbell pullovers to help open them up before we kind of get into, these should be flip-flopped, okay? Before we get into like, say, a pull-up or anything like that, which we've done earlier in the session as well. And then simple, either seated overhead press, right, to develop some of the strength in the overhead position. So front delt, triceps, all of that. Or if you want to, and maybe you lack a little bit of stability right now, a great substitution is to put in a bottoms up overhead press, because there is a significant amount of overhead pressing in this training block. So having a stability component in there to deload a little bit might be beneficial for you. And then we'll typically hit some arms, maybe some GM press, some dips, cable rope extensions, woman biceps. So really preacher curls, dumbbell curls, easy bar curls, whatever works for you. And with these, you can take these close to failure, you train a little bit more like a bodybuilder, because we're just trying to put some size on with the body overall. And then we'll have either like a shoulder or grip based circuit. So if you're more of a combat guy, you want to continue to work on your grip strength, or that's an area you want to work on, you can tend to spend, 10, 15 minutes working on the grip strength at the end of that. Or if you want to develop your shoulders a little bit more, upper body a little bit more, you can then do a shoulder circuit, which again, I typically do like front raises, lateral raises, reverse slides, upright rows, dumbbell upright rows with that, 12, 15 reps with that, okay? So after our upper body, then we get into our field training. So very simple, we're just working through the different components of being an athlete on the field. So first block is acceleration, then we're getting into top speed, and then we're getting into change of direction before we raise it to true agility-based training, okay? So reason we're starting with the acceleration-based stuff first is I think it's most important in the beginning. If you can accelerate quickly, have good positioning, it's gonna improve your top speed overall, and typically it's not as taxing on the body compared to like max velocity sprints. But as you progress later on and the intensity and intention increases, typically we'll have separate days. We'll have a top speed day, and then we'll have an acceleration change of direction day where we're prioritizing the top speed and being fully fresh and recovered. Okay, so we'll work through some wall drills, getting good triple flexion, triple extension, good positioning with our feet in relation to our hip. We'll do some specific, now that we got some tech work, we're trying to, reinforce those movement patterns. Then we'll take it into some controlled start drills, like a 3, 5, and 7 cone start drill, where the athletes are actually trying to replicate that, hit that native step in their stance, technically on the hip. And then we'll say, hey, get after it. Let's try to have a transition into your actual sprints. Learn what you can, but don't think too much, okay? And actually get that stimulus for acceleration we're looking for. Same thing with wickets. This is a little bit of a slower approach, as months 5, 6, 7, we're gonna be in top speed a lot more. But we'll do some controlled wickets where we're trying to work that quick cycle. We're trying to get, have them get their knee up if they lag on that a little bit, and then contact in the ground right underneath their hip. And then what we'll do is we'll do some build-ups where we'll lengthen the wickets out, and we will have them go through and do wickets and then try to carry that wicket form into their sprint, again, to help with some of that transition into their overall technique when they are running at full speed. And then we'll get into some change of direction drills where we're working heavily on foot placement, where the foot's contacting the ground in relation to their body, where their hips are at, if they're high or low. And we'll really hammer that for a while and progress those drills before then going into, say, like a simple 3 cone drill where now they're putting it all together and they're going through it. And then as the weeks go on and the program goes on, it gets harder and harder and harder, and we start adding visual cues, audio cues, things like that. So this was a lot to intake. I really appreciate you if you stayed for the entire video. And if you want this program, it's going to be coming out here in the Peak Performance program in the next few weeks. Just make sure to check the caption below. I'll keep that updated with when it actually goes live. If not, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your questions around any changes or anything that you would want to see in there, or if you have general questions overall. All right, peace.